All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome back. What I wanted to do just real quickly is show a little video of an upcoming global flood summit that's going to be taking place in September. I think I may have mentioned this before, class, today. Anyway, this is a promotional video for it, and there's going to be several speakers, including myself, presenting at this conference. Oops.
Where is it at?
It's online.
Oh, it's on.
Yeah, it's all strictly streaming online.
At this unearth a radically different perspective on Earth's violent past. Realize the ultimate mechanical alternative to deep-time uniformitarianism. Uncover a unified theory for frozen mammoths, comets, and ocean trenches. Discover the power of supercritical subcrustal water, where biblical history perfectly aligns with foundational fluid dynamics. Stop compromising on the anomalies standard tectonics ignore and join us up to see the calculations for yourself. Help.
Anyway, it'll be Saturday, September 19th. Got a couple of really, I think, very good speakers, not myself. A guy named Bodie Hodge, who's well known in the creationist movement, and Brian Lauer, who's a big hydroplate theory advocate, and then a guy named Douglas Sharp. And the intention of the summit was to present not only, to have an open forum basically where people who have varying opinions about the theories for the global flood can present. It's turning out to be more of a hydroplate theory conference because most people that are involved with it are pro-hydroplate, you know, see the value in hydroplate theory. But anyway, if you have interest in it, I can get you some more information on it as well. But it'll be live streamed in September on the 19th. Whoops. This is very unresponsive. Maybe I could just start it. What? There we go. Okay. All right, so back to class here. Last week, we sort of ended up talking about the airplanes that were found in Greenland, the ones that had to go down in a severe snowstorm. It was in basically 1942. And then they were discovered in 1988 underneath this layers of ice, about 260 feet of ice. And I had incorrectly said it was 48 years. It's actually 50 years later. In August of 1992 is when they were excavated. And one of the things that we were really talking about was the evolutionary scientists, or basically mainstream scientists, are counting the rings or the layers in the ice cores, and saying that they were annual rings. And we found out through looking at that, there should have been exactly, and I corrected it in the class, there should have been, if there was 50 years, there should have been 50 annual rings, right? Turns out there were many hundreds of rings, according to several of the people that were there. So there's something really seriously wrong with that. And so we ended up talking about this and saying the scientific elite was still calling them annual rings in 1998. There's something kind of seriously wrong here. And so what I decided to do is look into errors, try to think, well, okay, where are we finding errors? And it turns out that there are errors in the scientific community And a very disturbing thing too is also the fact that textbooks that are used to teach our children, and us too for that matter, are textbooks that contain numerous errors. And so I wanted to just concentrate on this just for just a couple minutes because I think this is kind of disturbing, and I wasn't really aware that there was so many mistakes and so many errors in our textbooks. So we have to be aware that these textbooks that are being used today in our universities and high schools contain many factual mistakes, impossible or incorrect diagrams, and experiments that are totally unworkable. So landmark studies have revealed that popular middle school and high school texts are riddled with editorial blunders, physical misconceptions, and production errors. And this, of course, can confuse students and hinders scientific literacy. For example, in one 2-year study led by North Carolina State University researcher, they found that 12 of the most popular science textbooks used at middle schools across the nation are riddled with errors. According to the author, the report's author, he said, these are terrible books. He says, and they're probably a strong component of why we do so poorly in science standardized tests. So just what kind of errors do these textbooks contain? According to a report by ABC News, they contain several types or different types of errors. They point out that textbooks contain factual and conceptual mistakes, including the misstating of fundamental laws of physics, like Newton's law, for example. They confuse the theory of force with acceleration, or they give incorrect explanations for the natural phenomena, like how light passes through a prism. These are just a couple of examples of mistakes they found in these textbooks. They also contain production and editing blunders, mislabeled photographs, reversed images, like there's a picture in one book where they have the Statue of Liberty. And the hand of the torch in the statue is backwards, so the photo was put in backwards. They also contain a map, or one contained a map with an illustration of the equator running through the southern part of the United States, because the equator is the horizontal line that splits the north and south hemispheres of the Earth. Well, the equator doesn't run through the United States. It runs horizontally through the northern part of South America. It's not even close, okay? And one mislabeled photo in one textbook actually had a photo of the popular singer Linda Ronstadt with the caption below the photo saying that was a photo of a silicon crystal. Now, how Linda Ronstadt's photo showed up in a textbook is beyond me, a science textbook. I couldn't find this. I thought I'd search for this and find a picture of this online somewhere. I couldn't find it, but there were many websites that reported this error. I was like, really, Linda Ronstadt? That's a really bizarre one. They also found many unworkable experiments, including lab instructions or diagrams of physical setups that are physically impossible or could not possibly work in a real classroom. So should we ask the question why these errors happen in textbooks? I think one factor is these textbooks publishers typically have in-house publishing teams rather than review by third parties who are scientists for accuracy. Many of these books are assembled by publishing staff rather than vetted field experts. And some listed authors report not writing or even reviewing the final content. I mean, wouldn't you want that reviewed to make sure it's accurate? These publishing teams are also not trained scientists that would be able to even confirm the accuracy of what they're publishing. In some cases, there are rushed revisions of these books. State curriculum standards change rapidly, and a lot of times at the last minute, forcing publishers to swap out texts or images without properly updating captions and context. I mean, remember the Linda Ronstadt thing? That should have been easily found, right? You would think that'd be pretty obvious. Somebody along the line you thought would have seen that. So according to a website called misconceptions.science.book.net, they state that unreliable science textbooks lead to misconceptions and betray teachers. American science education depends critically on textbooks, and teachers rely on classroom textbooks when preparing presentations. A perfectly reasonable practice, given that no one expects a science teacher to have quadruple majored in chemistry, physics, biology, and geology. I mean, I'm not going to be an expert at all these different things. There are different people that spend their lifetimes in each one of these fields, so a teacher's not going to be an expert in even probably one of them, right? So a North Carolina State University physics professor named John Hibbets, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, led the 2-year survey, and this was completed in the year 2001. And he estimated that about 85% of U.S. School students use one or more of these 12 textbooks that they studied. The study's reviews tried to contact the textbook's authors with questions. But in many cases, the people listed said they didn't even write the book, and some didn't even know that their names had been listed. Some of the authors of a physical science textbook, for example, were biologists, not physical scientists. Hibbets went on to say they get people to check for political correctness. They try to get in as much cultural diversity as possible, he said. He said they just don't seem to understand what science is about. Again, this aspect of political correctness is just infiltrating the schools like you wouldn't believe. It's really a serious problem. This just illustrates this much deeper problem in our schools and universities today. Hubbard said that the researchers also contacted the publishers who for the most part either dismissed the panel's findings or promised corrections in subsequent editions. So in other words, they just brushed it off. His report then followed up on these textbooks over the following years when subsequent revisions came out, and guess what he found? Reviews of later editions turned up even more errors than corrections, the report said. Instead of correcting mistakes, they actually got worse. And of course, students rely on textbooks to guide them while completing homework assignments and studying exams, and unfortunately, middle school and high school textbooks are not written with the principal goal of conveying accurate information or genuine understanding. At least that's what it seems. They don't seem to be concerned about this. It certainly seems like they're written with the intention of training students to fill in the correct answers on bubble tests and spit out, what they want on a test rather than learning the concepts. In other words, they want you to memorize and fill it in for the tests, and then after that, they really don't understand the concepts anyway. In short, textbooks' main goal is to get students to write down the correct answer, even if they arrive at the answer through unsound logic or false premises. And textbooks were found on many occasions to teach myths that allow students to answer certain stock questions correctly, but prevent them from developing a genuine understanding of the topic. So we need to learn to think critically. And again, even in my own past, I was not a very critical thinker. My wife will attest to that. So in the past, but it certainly seems that everyone should agree that if errors are discovered in textbooks, they should be removed, right? Wouldn't you think so? Would you think people surveyed would think, yes, maybe we should remove errors? Well, that's not necessarily the case. Brian Lauer here is shown in this picture. Now, he's going to be one of the ones presenting at this conference. He's going to be doing a presentation on the hydroplate theory. And he's an avid hydroplate theory advocate. And he's also an advocate of the truth, no matter where that takes you. And he frequently has given presentations at various schools and colleges regarding the subject of errors in textbooks. And he's here shown at a booth he set up at a county fair in Minnesota, where he asked those who passed by or visited his booth the question, should our errors in our textbooks be removed? In the circle here, we see some of the responses. Oh, we don't see the circle there. Why is the circle? Oh, yeah, there it is. In the circle there, we see the yes responses were 52. So 52 people responded, yes, we should get these errors out of these textbooks. What's a little surprising is that 10 of them responded over here, no. 10 people said no, they shouldn't be corrected. Not a very large sample, but here you're talking about 52 versus 10, as nearly 1 in 5 felt errors in textbooks shouldn't be removed. I thought that was a little shocking. It seemed like people that would be unanimous on this. Also a bit disturbing is that 4 said they didn't care, and then 4 more said they didn't know.
Who's the audience? Are these adults? Are these teenagers who, no, they
I don't know. He doesn't specify that. But I mean, they should be so, yeah.
I get that why doesn't everyone
This,
do
and
that?
this is not a scientific survey. It's just,
I'm
you
just
know,
curious who the audience is. Other teams
Yeah.
like ours.
it could be. Yes.
Is this survey, is it the public schools, the private schools, or both?
I think it's just any textbooks in general. Now he's using a textbook from St. Cloud University, I think, is where he's from. He's from Minnesota, and he used a textbook, and you'll see an illustration of this in just a second, that is used at one of these schools, and this was in Minnesota that he did this. So 4 said they didn't care. 4 more said they didn't even know. So I'd probably put those in the no category too, since they didn't respond that they're in favor of removing these errors, right? I mean, saying you don't know or don't care certainly isn't saying that, yes, you are in favor of removing the errors. So if you total those 8 in with the other 10, now you have 18. So out of 70 people, 18 either said no or didn't care. That's around 25% of the total. And I'm just like kind of shocked by that. He also said that one of the people who visited his booth was a curriculum director for the schools, and she said that the curriculum that they were using was just the best they could find, even though I guess knowingly they contained errors. And Brian responded back to her saying that, well, it could be even better if the errors were removed, right? To that, she said, oh, I can't do that. Whoops. Says, oh, I can't do that. I might lose my job. So this teacher is afraid of losing her job for pointing out errors in textbooks. I mean, to me, that just seems like a lack of integrity. Again, just can't really understand this. In another video of Brian's on YouTube, he visited a school board, and he does this a lot, where he raises the question of errors in textbooks to school board members. And this is a shot of out of the video. One of the first questions he asks and raises to the members of the school board, and 3 of them are shown in this video, and I'm not really sure if there are more than 3 people in this room or not. But he was asked if they were in favor of removing these textbooks, the errors from these textbooks. And what he gets back from them as you watch the video is basically no response. They won't say a word. They don't say a thing. You get this girl on the left, on the right here, kind of just has this grin on her face. And the other 2 look like they're just gazing off into space. They're just totally disinterested in this. I think their expressions on their face kind of say a lot here. It's weird when you watch this video how they just don't have any reaction to this at all. And then Brian even says, well, of course, you can't respond to that. You know, it's crazy. Then he shows them an example from a science textbook where he states that an evidence for evolution that's frequently found in textbooks is that chimps and humans only have a 1.6% difference in their genetics, with the wording below the picture that this is an evidence that scientists use to relate different species to each other. And the thought here is that if humans and chimpanzees are so similar in their DNA and genetic makeup, that this is an evidence that humans and chimps came from each other. It must have, humans must have evolved from chimps. And these students who see this don't know any better and might actually agree with this as an evidence supporting evolution. However, Brian goes on to show several sources saying that this is not true. One shown here on the screen is from AnswersSearchJournal.org, which states only 69% of the chimpanzee X chromosome was similar to human, and only 43% of the Y chromosome. So the X and Y chromosomes are the ones that determine biological sex. But it then goes on to say that genome-wide, only 70% of chimpanzee DNA was similar to human. This is an oft-repeated claim of evolutionary propaganda that chimpanzees and humans are 98.5 or 98.4% identical. And this high level of similarity is required to bolster the hypothesis that humans and chimps shared a common ancestor, which is what evolution states. Oh, we probably evolved from a common ancestor, or maybe we evolved from a chimp or a chimp-like creature, right? This is based on theoretical models of human evolution and known mutation rates in both humans and chimps, but anything significantly less than 98.5% of DNA would certainly destroy the foundation of this entire model. And then I looked a little further. According to the ICR website, and ICR stands for the Institute for Creation Research, one of the leading creationist organizations out there. On their website, Jeffrey Tompkins began reviewing the scientific literature on this subject. When he did, he realized that there was serious problems with the research that claimed that human DNA and chimp DNA are nearly identical. And in every publication he studied, it became clear that evolutionary researchers had cherry-picked highly similar DNA sequences that support evolution and omit data that were dissimilar. In other words, they took little segments of DNA that were really similar. Okay, see, these are really close, and dismissed the sequences that weren't similar. He said that he recalculated DNA similarities in a number of evolutionary studies by including the discarded data and attained much lower levels of human chimp DNA similarity ranging between 66 and 86%. This is another example of, it seems to be, evolutionary bias. I mean, you wouldn't omit these things if they supported what you were looking for, but now you're going to eliminate them and omit them because it doesn't agree with what you've already pre-decided. The article goes on to say that improvements in DNA sequencing technology are slowly bringing out the truth to light in the newest version of the chimpanzee genome, which was completed in 2018. Due to these improvements, had one-to-one exact matches in the chimpanzee genome was 84.38%. So again, far less than 98.4%. So not only are human and chimp DNA 98.5% identical, they're too dissimilar to share a common evolutionary ancestor. And this refutes evolution, and of course that affirms the biblical account of creation. So what this subject brings to light is just how unreliable science textbooks appear to be regarding many subjects, and especially those relating to origins. And there's many more examples that could be cited here. But so what's clear from this brief analysis is that children in state and government-run schools or other schools following the national curriculum are being taught things in their science lessons which are demonstrably untrue. And nowhere is this more important than the subject of origins. And origins, of course, is paramount in that your worldview is dramatically affected by what you believe about where you and I came from. Of course, you either came out of nothing, out of nowhere by blind random chance, which is what evolution says, or you were specially created by an intelligence that not only had the intelligence to design everything in the universe, but also the creative power to make it happen. And there's really no other third option that I'm aware of. And now imagine impressionable children and even adults being only presented this one option without examining the large body of evidence that opposes it. And what would it lead them to believe? So the more you look into this question, the more amazed you should become at the total lack of evidence that supports evolution. And those facts that we're talking about here should be very disturbing, that so many errors not only occur in these textbooks, but so many people seem to be okay with it. It doesn't seem to bother them. I think you should teach all the science. Not that I necessarily trust that the government-run schools could do it properly anyway. And so that's where you and I have to come in. Basically with what we're discussing in these classes, and with what Dr. Brown especially has given us, I think we're blessed that we have this information. I mean, even very few in the Christian community know about this. So that's again why I think teaching the flood and creation is so important. And the flood, when properly understood, has a much greater impact on our earth than any other single event in history, and verifies that the flood actually happened, something that most evolutionists will completely deny. Sorry for that little detour, but I wanted to go through that since that was kind of brought up there, and it was just disturbed me that there were seemingly so many errors in our textbooks. So now I want to shift back to our theories about the frozen mammoth, and so we're up to number 8. This one is called the shifting coast theory, and this theory states that before the last ice age, the Hudson Bay was at the North Pole, and so the Hudson Bay is pictured here up north of Canada in our map here. And this theory states that before the last ice age, the Hudson Bay was actually at the North Pole, so everything shifted. Hudson Bay is a sea here, and the current North Pole is quite a bit higher. So what ended up happening here. Before the last ice age, Siberia and Alaska were further south. Because of being further south from the North Pole, this area could support abundant vegetation and thus large herds of animals. This is what the theory purports. So paramount to this theory is that it advocates that the Earth's crust shifted into its current orientation, but why? There's really not much in Dr. Brown's book that details why they are advocating this. So I wanted to more thoroughly understand this a little bit, so I did a little more investigation. And I did various searches and came across some additional material that hopefully explains a little bit more about what this theory proposes. So it appears that the shifting coast theory can be traced back to an American college professor and author named Charles Hapgood, who developed a theory of crustal displacement, which he proposed in his 1958 book called The Earth's Shifting Crust. So in this book, he suggests the Earth's entire outer shell can slide rapidly over the interior mantle. Now remember, the crust is on top, a very thin shell. The mantle is below that. So we're only talking about maybe 40, 50, 60 miles. So he's thinking this crust can shift over the mantle. So he says this sudden shift, he argued, moves the geographic poles to new locations, causing fast climate change, mass extinctions, and great floods. So instead of a flood causing this, he's saying there's another reason for this. He proposed that heavy polar ice buildup on the crust unbalances the crust, forcing it to slip over the layers below the crust. So Albert Einstein briefly supported Hapgood's early physical concepts and wrote a foreword for his 1958 book, even though Einstein later noted that the ice weight alone was not enough to trigger a shift like this. So there wouldn't have been enough weight in this ice in order to make this kind of a shift. Now, I'm looking at this, I was a little confused. I'm not really sure of the timing of this when Einstein supported this theory, and when he later noted this problem. Since Einstein died in 1955, so it's 3 years before Hapgood's book was published. So maybe he was aware of it before the book was published. He must have been, obviously, and then refuted it before he passed away. So why Hapgood didn't change it before that, I'm not really certain. At any rate, Hapgood published a later book titled The Path to the Pole, in which he conceded Einstein's point that the weight of the polar ice is insufficient to cause any kind of polar shift. Now imagine, this rock grinding on rock. I mean, this seems completely impossible to me, that this could shift no matter what happens. It all gets a little complex, and there's a number of varying opinions that supposedly refute Hapgood's theory on crustal movement. And one, for example, is those that support plate tectonics say they disprove Hapgood's theory of rapid crustal sliding. So plate tectonics is the theory that the Earth has a relatively thin outermost surface, which move relatively to each other atop the underlying rock at about the same rate your fingernail grows. And this movement has been going on for millions and millions of years. Again, what forces? We'll go through plate tectonics a little bit later in the class, and all the evidence is against it. Actually, plate tectonics is currently the dominant theory in secular geology, but it has a lot of problems. And it's largely taught today as fact in our schools. Again, another thing that seems to be false. It's well known too. Again, you get a scientific minority that sees the problems, but the majority doesn't, or doesn't care, or doesn't look into it. And so this scientific consensus seems to be the thing that most of these, or a lot of these evolutionists are adhere to. There was one video I saw from Neil deGrasse Tyson where he was questioned about this. And he says, oh, it doesn't really matter. What you have to look at is consensus. What does the majority think? He keeps repeating over and over again, consensus, consensus. It's like, well, if the consensus is wrong, that's wrong, right? I mean, You could have 99 out of 100 people believing something is wrong, but it's still not right. I mean, it's still incorrect. So we'll cover this a little bit more, but I want you to start to see this is a rather hotly debated topic, and there are just a number of varying opinions on this. So again, according to this theory, here vast amounts of ice accumulate, build up as the ice age began and progressed. This occurred at what was then the North Pole, which was where the Hudson Bay was. And this massive amount of ice buildup on the Earth's crust, it became imbalanced, and the Earth's crust slid. Not that the Earth rotated or its axis changed. It's the crust that slid. So I could sort of start to see it if they said, well, the Earth became unbalanced and then rolled, which actually is something we're going to cover when we get to hydroplate theory. But they said the crust slid, and that just, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense. But anyway, this would end up moving Siberia northward in the direction of the red arrows here, from a more temperate region to a less temperate region, and thus a much lower temperature region. It would have gone up into what's now above or near the Arctic Circle, which is now basically permanently frozen. So this is how they explain that. And then because the Earth is slightly flattened out at the poles and bulges at the equator, the shifting crust would have produced many ruptures, and volcanic gas was thrown above the atmosphere where it cooled, and even more of this gas built up and then descended as a super cold blob. Again, no, I couldn't find anything more about it than just some super cold blob. Blob of what? I'm not sure. But airborne volcanic dust lowered the temperatures on Earth and caused phenomenal snowstorms, and mammoths and other animals living in Siberia and Alaska were suddenly frozen and buried in extremely cold snow, and some are still preserved. So again, this is what this theory is advocating. So shifting of the Earth's crust is a major factor in this theory, but in the hydroplate theory, we'll see the reasons, not that the crust shifted, but that the whole Earth rolled, and it's pretty amazing. But the problems with this, I mean, there's just a lot of problems with this. So here now, this map shows what the current locations are now. Siberia, of course, is further north because of this shift of the crust, according to this theory. This shows now where the North Pole is today and where the Hudson Bay is now today, which is far south of the North Pole. So let's look at the various evidences here and see how well this theory explains them. So according to Dr. Brown's chart here, we do see that there are about 10 of them that this theory does seem to explain, which is the most of any theory so far. My largest issue, again, with this is the same that Albert Einstein pointed out, in that it doesn't seem logical that the ice weight alone could cause or be enough to trigger this kind of shift. So sliding Earth's outer crust around 2,000 miles, which is the current distance from the North Pole to the Hudson Bay, seems to be quite impossible. I just don't see it. And if that did happen, you'd think there would be huge amounts of broken up crust, and there would be evidence of it, but I don't think there is. Other issues do include that there's not any explanation for the formation of the frozen muck. The minus 150 degrees or lower temperature, once again needed to preserve the stomach and mouth contents of the frozen mammoth. Doesn't explain vertical compression or the peppered tusks. The frozen remains of mammoths and other animals are found in northern Alaska, but if the crust shifted so that Hudson Bay moved from the North Pole to its present location, Alaska wouldn't move very far. It wouldn't move appreciably northward, so it doesn't seem to explain that. So why would northern Alaska suddenly shift from a temperate climate to an Arctic type climate? Also, it claims that there were ruptures, and if there were this much shift in the crust, where are the ruptures? I don't know what they're talking about there. Again, it just seems like there's too many theories that we can have any confidence that this one's actually correct. So another one drops out of line. It's kind of like rats fleeing from a sinking ship here. So we're up to number 8. 8 have gone. We're about to go to number 9 here. So far every theory seems to fail. So the last theory before we get to hydroplate theory is the 9th one, and it's called the meteorite theory. This one states, at the end of the last ice age, a large iron meteorite hit Earth's atmosphere, and the resulting heat temporarily melted. The resulting heat temporarily melted the top layers of the frozen tundra in Siberia, and this melting caused mammoths to sink into muck. The muck then refroze, and poor visibility during all this caused others to blunder to their deaths in icy bogs. So in other words, they couldn't see where they were going. They fell into icy bogs. Okay, lots of problems with this one. Again, like other theories we've covered, this one doesn't explain some of the problems we've already covered in some of the other theories, such as the abundant food sources and the warm climate necessary for this abundant food to be present. The meteorite theory might explain why type 1 ice melted. Remember we talked about the different types of ice. And allowed mammoths to sink into icy bogs, but type 3 ice is not explained, which rock ice is similar to type 3 ice. It doesn't explain that. It doesn't explain the sudden warming trend that would have melted a top layer of muck enough to cause mammoths to sink into it. Okay, you don't really think about this one for just a second. If a rapid jump in atmospheric temperature that would be enough to melt the permafrost muck at least 13 feet or more below the surface, because most mammoths are about 12, 13 feet tall. So in other words, you'd have to melt it at least 13 feet down, right, for this mammoth to sink into it and be covered by it. There would have been so much heat, it would be unbelievable. The amount of heat that would have been necessary to melt that many feet of muck down from the surface would have incinerated the mammoths. I mean, they would just have been evaporated. Once again, I don't really see this as a viable option. And again, being that they're saying this intense amount of heat is exactly the opposite of what we need. We need temperatures well below 150 degrees below zero or lower in order to freeze these things. So in other words, instead of that, these animals would have been incinerated. So. All right, so now we come to the 10th theory, which is to explain the frozen mammoths. And of course, this is the hydroplate theory. And here is the explanation for the frozen mammoths according to hydroplate theory. And we'll go through the evidences for this too as we go on. I know we're going to run out of time. So on that terrible day when the Earth's crust ruptured, as the fountains of the great deep were opened up, the rupture of the Earth's crust passed between what is now Siberia and Alaska in just a few minutes. Remember, the crust, as it split apart, this rupture would have traveled at a rate of around 3 miles per second. Pretty amazing. So jetting water up through this crack would come from the waters contained in the subterranean chambers below. And this would have produced tremendous amounts of water shooting up out of the opening, and thus tremendous amounts of rain. However, the source of this rain is from the waters from the subterranean chambers, not from the Earth's atmosphere as it is today. So this is the first rain that's really recorded in Scripture. I don't think it rained up until this time, and this isn't common rain. If you remember too, earlier we talked about the word used for rain in the passage of Genesis 7, 11, and 12. Is that the second one or the first one? That's the first. Oh, good. You may recall the Hebrew word used in Genesis 7:11 for rain is geshem. And geshem rain is best thought of as a torrential downpour or deluge. Kind of like one that Earth had never encountered before or since. So there's a different word for rain also, is the Hebrew word matar. And this means normal rain. So violent rain is geshem rain, and there's an important difference that isn't conveyed by simply translating both words as rain. So you'll see the word rain in the Old Testament. Well, sometimes it's geshem, sometimes it's matar, and they're different. So again, that's why it's important, I think, to go back to concordances and things and make sure you see what's really being advocated, what these words really mean. So during the next few hours, some of the accelerating and expanding subterranean water that expanded and exploded out of this rupture in the crust went high up into the Earth's atmosphere, but not so high that it went out of Earth's gravitational sphere of influence. So remember we talked about the formation of asteroids and comets that would have been at such a rate of speed that it would have escaped Earth's gravitational sphere of influence. Well, some of it wouldn't too. You'd think logically, some of it wouldn't. So the Earth's atmosphere actually is divided into 5 different layers. And the 4th layer up from the surface is called the thermosphere. And it begins about 50 miles high up off the surface of the Earth. And in this layer, this high up in altitude above the Earth's surface, the effective temperature in that layer can be as low as 184 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. So recall it requires at least 150 or so degrees below 0 to instantly freeze the mammoths and preserve them rapidly. Well, here we have now a situation where we have temperature well below 150 degrees below 0. Thus, any water that would have entered into this layer would have instantly froze, because if it's still being within the Earth's gravitational sphere, then it fell back to Earth. So it fell back to the Earth as tremendous amounts of hail. And this would also cause tremendous downdrafts of cold air in the process. So the Earth's gravitational pull in the thermosphere, even though it's 50 miles up, is still about 85 to 95% to 97% as strong as it is right here on the surface. So you're still well within the Earth's gravitational sphere. And so objects that would have entered into this layer at the correct upward velocity, high enough to get into that layer, but not so high to go beyond the layer, would have then fallen back toward Earth. So, let's see here. So the frozen hail would also have contained large amounts of sediments, including rocks and dirt, and also pulverized plant matter that would have been abundant on the surface of the pre-flood Earth. We'll talk about that probably next week. But the Earth would have had tremendous amounts of vegetation, I think, pre-flood. So this pulverized plant matter, with this explosion that was a tremendous explosion, would have pulverized this plant matter and would have mixed with the dirt and the rocks. And when it fell back down, remember that this is going to be an important clue when we discuss the origins of muck. So these frozen droplets were supercooled well below freezing, normal freezing, and fell back down to Earth, blanketing vast areas and thick blankets of extremely cold hail and dirt mixed with dirt and plant material. And even warm climates were quickly transformed in just a matter of a couple of hours. And some animals were suddenly buried and suffocated and frozen and compressed by tons of cold, muddy hail that dropped on top of them. Again, these blankets of muddy ice are known to be hundreds of feet thick. And this would have insulated and preserved many of these animals during the flood phase. So the topmost layers of ice that might have melted, dirt in that ice remained and settled on top. And so the ice that was below would have insulated that from freezing, or from thawing. And we'll talk about that more next week, but that's basically the overview of the hydroplate theory. We'll get into more details on that next week. Great, thank you so much.